Hey everyone, today we're going to jump into my hybrid dash list. This is what I just made a top 8 with at a local ProQuest. It was probably about, I think, at least 40, if not more players. Bigger than some ProQuests, smaller than others. Our local scene is pretty dedicated to the game, so hopefully it does at least come across as a somewhat competitively minded take. So anyone who's been following this channel for a while has seen many iterations of this list, many deck techs on this list. I even recently did an entire hour-long sideboard guide on it. So I'm not going to jump in too much into detail over the actual micro mechanics of the deck. If you're interested, there's plenty of videos covering the topic. I will run through one more time though. So this hybrid dash list involves a 61 card main board, which is going to be all dedicated to boost aggro. Every card in here is going to be a mechanologist card. So every single thing that you're going to boost to banish the top card is going to get go again. You're going to have lots of explosive finishers, mostly revolving around high octane as well as maximum velocity. The only inclusion from Dynasty has just been Pulse Wave Harpoon. The rest of this deck is pretty much just what it was during the Pro Tour season around Lille. There was a consideration the last time I did a deck tech on this to cut 2 Magnetic Shockwaves, add 2 more Tekla Pounders, and then instead of red payload to run BIOS update. Ultimately, my decision to cut it and to revert back to this previous change was just the expectation of Dromai at my local events. If you were expecting more Phi, I think that payload does less, and I think the ability to not only just have a 0 for 3 essentially on your turn, but to cheat Tekla cores or pounders into play can really help you high roll in a decks like Briar or Phi, even Viscerai if you need to. So I think if I were expecting more of those, I probably would have gone that route. Now, ironically, I only faced one Dromai during Swiss, and I did face a lot of Phis. And then of course the transformational sideboard where you're going to run D-reacts and then pistol items, of course, an AB piece as well. This is pretty much just going to be for Guardians and any other slow, grindy matchups. So the way I typically do it is I bring in this package for Dorinthia, Old and Bravo, and then I bring in the pistol items for Dromai. The main reason why is because this is a very good endgame against Dromai. Also allows you to fatigue Dromai, but if their board state ever gets out of control, that's how you lose a game. So you need to be able to have boost cards in your deck to be able to clear dragons. There are some 5-card hands that are really worth setting up. Things with like maximum velocity or high octane require really solid 5-card hands. You can even get more setup if you spark a genius in a Tekla core, getting a card draw to then arsenal. So if you ever find yourself stuck with just like a T-bone in hand and you're wondering if you should play it or arsenal it or any deep boost card, sometimes actually I prioritize, even if I have a larger hand, if I have let's say a blue pitch and I have throttle 0 to 60 and a T-bone, sometimes I'll actually just opt to not play something like the T-bone or the 0 to 60. I'll arsenal them instead, because the synergy you can get off of max velocity or high octane if you draw into it on the following turn is really good, rather than playing it, drawing into the following hand, having to arsenal one of these cards and then wait another turn cycle to play them. That's a very small, minute thing I've just kind of picked up since I've been getting in more reps, especially during the ProQuest. I found myself doing that a lot more often than I thought. Also works very well with Crown because you can just filter them, because sometimes the weaker attacks, while an arsenal can propel some of your high synergistic turns, sometimes you do just want to crown them and find something new. So what were my matchups for the day? So my matchups were, I started the day playing against Phi, playing against Ace from Hyperloops, and that matchup pretty much went exactly how I wanted it to. I got to go second. I pushed a bunch of damage on turn 2. I got to arsenal maximum velocity. Didn't present enough on the following turn, so there's no reason for me to block. I did about 25 damage with maximum velocity, and then I got a Pulse Wave Harpoon turn, which is really good against Phi. The only issue was I made a pretty severe mistake. On the Phi turn, he just blocked out and then played Energy Potion and passed. And that was when I did the Pulse Wave Harpoon. And I revealed Art of War, E-Strike, and a blue pitch. And I ended up taking the blue pitch because I thought that meant that Art of War was going to have to be pitched with a red to use. And I completely glossed over the fact that there was an E-Pawn on the table. I got hit with about 32 damage. It was pretty nuts. It was E-Strike, draw a card, go again off his snaps, Energy Potion into Art of War, getting Spreading Flames and Flame Call Awakening, and then fetching off a Mask of the Pouncing Lynx to go get Lava Burst. So it was a ton of damage. It was pretty absurd. And I definitely could have mitigated a lot of that if I had grabbed the E-Strike instead of the blue pitch, if I had noticed that there was, the Energy Potion on the table. I still ended up winning the game. I went down to 1 and got to keep I believe, a 4-card hand that was just like all, red attacks plus a blue. So it was pretty easy to close out, but it was tighter than it should have been if I had made the right decision. Round 2 was a game against Oldham, and I got his list right here, which is real nice. Oldham is now, I don't want to say an auto loss. Definitely know you can win the matchup. It's very not favored for you anymore, which is very odd because traditionally, like, most of us would agree that Oldham is very easy. The problem is that with Icelander now killing Oldham very quickly with a setup combo, that's much more dangerous than Dash's setup. And especially because of Icelander's prevalence in the meta, Oldham has now been forced to adapt basically out of necessity. If you have no game plan to beat Icelander, there's pretty much no reason you should be playing the deck. So now there are a lot of very efficient attacks. You got red glacial back in the deck now. Like, it's crazy. Lots of very tall attacks that are pretty much like, on curve, on rate, sometimes a little bit more. But now the introduction of like more pummels. I've even seen lists that are on yellow pummel now. This one's on 5, but there are lists out there that have more. Also the inclusion of E-Strike and Rouse. I've even seen some Oldham decks, even in my local meta, on Zealous Belting. So what happened was, Oldham was forced to change due to Icelander and was forced to be able to kill a setup combo deck, ideally in the first turn cycle. And what is Dash? It's a setup deck that would traditionally beat Guardians in the end game. So it gets punished really hard. It gets hit in the crossfire. Oldham now has tech for essentially Dash and Icelander at the same time. I would actually say this tech is ironically better into Dash, even though it was, pretty much like built with Icelander in mind, although Dash is obviously a consideration for changing up this game plan. The issue is that you have to take too much damage to set up the items, right? And you can't be boosting in the matchup either. So if you don't have an item, you're just hoping to block out for 12. And then when you get an item, you're hoping to block for 6 and play the item. Problem is, like, you're just taking too much damage against this deck, right? When they're sending like Choke Slam at you, when they're sending Glacial, Pulverize, you're just taking too much in the first cycle. Pummel really punishes you. Another thing too is that you mostly relied on the D-Reacts to be able to stop all the damage from Guardian. And of course that worked when Guardian was just playing a bunch of blues and was like trying to block out the opponents. And it's much more difficult when they're on a proactive game plan, and much more difficult when they're on Command and Conquer. And not necessarily as Command and Conquer, because that's always existed in the deck. But with the increase in the number of pummels, the issue now is that they often don't even use their Arsenal in the Crown anymore. In my experience, as soon as I see CNC or pummel, they're just going to leave it there because it's a really good card against you. It messes up your really efficient blocking patterns. And if you ever put a D-React in Arsenal and you get CNC pummeled, you basically lose like a ton of life against Guardian. Even something just like a 3-card hand of like E-Strike into Whale, if you're trying to preserve your life total, pretty much rips your entire hand. It's very difficult to play around. Oldham is much more aggressive. You're going to have a lot of trouble setting up. And then even when you do set up, if you're on like my build, for instance, and you run 2 and 2 because it leaks damage on every single Rampart block plus Crown, the problem is even at like that end game, you're only leaking, I believe, 5 damage a turn. You leak 2 on the first one because you come in for 4, they Rampart Crown, they block 2. You leak 2 on the second one because Rampart goes up as a 2 block because they repay because you close the chain. And the third one comes in for 4 and they can buff it up to 3. So the issue is that you're only leaking 5. You have to pitch a bunch of cards, right? Because these cost a bunch of resources. Using the pistol multiple times a turn costs a bunch of resources. So even if you're drawing all blue hands, which you would want ideally, it's pretty much costing your entire hand to do 5 damage, and they're only pitching 1 card to block, and then they get to keep 3 cards to send like red glacial back at you. And assuming you want to keep up the same tempo of the game, you're only allowed to block with 1 card. So, if they send like red glacial not even fused and you block 3 and take 7 to send back 5, like you're losing in the exchange, even when you get your entire engine going, which is like the end game that you want, right? If they send Choke Slam, anything like that, that's even at that point. So you can kind of see where this is going, right? The issue is just that even when you have the full package assembled, they're just like outvaluing you on the turn cycles. And before then, you're taking a bunch of damage, and you're especially taking a bunch of damage to set up the items. They have too much disruption that can also hinder your plan of even getting the items out. Hypothermia is an insane card late game that they'll normally pitch stack. And what they can do is they can play Hypothermia when you have all the pistol items out. You can only attack once, and then they just get to essentially keep a 5-card hand if they want, with like pretty much no pressure to their life total. You also have things like Terra Sunder. Obviously, Winter's Bite's pretty disruptive since you're not a Tunic deck. Even this list having Oakenhold is kind of a problem. And then not to mention also Mage Master Boots, I think is a really good inclusion to this matchup compared to Iron Rot Boots or like Ironhide Legs. Because being able to keep a 5-card hand against Dash in the early to mid game when you're not even being pressured in your life total Like essentially Dash is just gonna like play an item and pass or load counters to the blue after blocking for 9 because they can't be boosting the matchup, or else either they boost a generic and lose their go again, or they boost a pistol item and then they have absolutely no way to win the end game. Keeping a 5-card hand with Helmet Fiendal is like actually pretty reasonable. It's not that difficult. Not only get an insane life point swing, like often like 5 life, you also get to draw 2 cards or places itself. And you can have a go white turn or a go tall turn fairly easily. So you push a bunch of damage, gain a bunch of life. It's a good tech for the matchup. And you can even run things like Blizzard, which late game really hurt the pistol engine. So it's tough. I would actually say that like Dash is really not fair anymore. We can actually just go look at the stats right now because I can just use the wonderful stats over here at Fabre. Shout out to all of you who do this. Also over at Talishar, we can go down and find Dash. And Dash currently has a 43% win rate over almost 2,500 games. Going second is much worse. Going first has a marginal impact on win rate, but going second with a 40% win rate is pretty garbage. So I pretty much like, I think I would solidify. Oh, now of course like it is difficult because Talishar can have mixed levels of player skill, and Oldhim is a deck I think that would punish new players a lot, just not understanding how to deal with the disruptive patterns of the deck, not knowing when to exploit off turns from Oldhim, not knowing how to prepare a late game to beat him, or how, in the case of these versions, how to adapt your first cycle game plan to not die, essentially. So who knows, but I mean, this is pretty good data. And 40% win rate is a better win rate than what I've had lately, so I think they're doing better than me. So it's tough. Even at San Jose, I was losing to Guardians. Most of my losses at the calling were to Guardian. I had a 0% win rate against Guardian for the day. I lost against an Oldhim. I lost against a Bravo. I think the Bravo one time, this is going to stay in my mind forever. The Bravo kept the 5-card hand, snapped, said no blocks, and then played Red Thunderquake from hand and then pummeled it with a red pummel. Like with no heat. 5-card hand played it, so it's not easy being Guardians anymore. So that was round 2. Round 3 was Dromai. I just fatigued the deck. I wasn't planning on doing that. Into Dromai, I just play the pistol items and essentially just try to set up high octane and win, especially because they're not even playing Phantasmal Footsteps anymore, so they don't even get to preserve a bunch of life using Footsteps. What happened was that I boosted a Purifier, and then the Dromai sort of just played every single Chromai and Mirror Guy early in the first cycle, even if the hand wasn't really made to be chained with a Chromai or a Mirror Guy. I basically realized that as long as I can kill the Chromai and Mirror Guy, they can't really set up an end game that can get around poppers. So all I did was I got a second induction chamber and I just committed to blocking damage and then wiping the table of dragons every single turn. And then I started intentionally pitching down my 6 powers, so like my max velocity, my payload, and my throttle. I didn't do it for all of them. I obviously kept some to be able to stabilize on the board and like take care of Yenderize and things like that are pretty hard for the pistol dash to kill very easily without Purifier. But I did intentionally pitch down a few of them because I knew that the second cycle for the Dromai wasn't going to be able to get around Phantasm destruction. And then I just committed really hard to wiping the table every single turn. Just even if it was Ashwings and it was more damage efficient to be attacking them, I would just wipe all the dragons. Try not to let them really go into the next turn with any dragons at all. Kept my life total high, so burn them all. Late game wasn't super destructive to my game plan. I don't think I was throwing lethal once throughout the game. Just preserve my life total as much as possible. And then late game, they set up some of the finisher dragons, but I had the Phantasm Poppers that I pitched early game, so there was just no way for them to possibly make it through. I think if Dromai is to try to beat hardcore fatigue, it's very difficult and requires like a level of dedication and skill that's probably above like what the average person is willing to put into it. So I think if you commit hardcore to fatigue from the beginning, you can actually probably get away with it. Although for my own comfort, I still like to set up the pistol items and high octane to win. It just didn't happen that game, but it worked out fine. After that, we played Icelander. I got paired up into the top seat for some reason, even though I had lost round 2. Icelander is pretty difficult. If they can chain their disruption pretty well, you have a pretty easy way to lose the game. Insidious Chill, Blizzard, Hypothermia, are all very difficult. CLF being played at instant speed as well as hypothermia really shuts you down, obviously, especially hypothermia. You just lose go again. It's all your cards conditionally get go again. Very difficult to deal with. If they do start to chain those and you start to get stacks out, basically, as you would say in Magic, the game plan I like to take is just preserving life total, pitching everything, because there's no way if I eat 2 Insidious Chill triggers plus a Aether Ice Vein, there's no way for me to have a turn on my end that even threatens anything from the Icelander, because if I only present 1 attack, even if it's a tall attack, if it's like a 6 power, she's perfectly fine just blocking with 2 cards, going to her turn using Coronet Peak and Arsenaling, or using the card to play a card from Arsenal and Waning Moon, and then just Arsenaling on her turn. There's really not much you actually get by trying to hold on to cards if they get lucky and they high roll a bunch of disruption on you early, like if they chain like chills and amulets into like Ice Veins and they're triggering all of these. It's just better to preserve your life total, because once those are gone, you can start taking damage off of just like raw Waning Moons or like Ice Bolts and things like that, just to be able to race them better. So you just take the off turns. That's pretty much it. And I eventually won the game with payload, which was pretty relevant because I was pretty close to fatiguing. I did run Induction Chamber in the matchup for that reason, although it was difficult because I was at a point where I was worried about getting shut down by hypothermia or by something like CLF. In response to me using the Induction Chambers and the game was so tight, I just needed to strip cards and I needed to boost to be able to threaten Achilles to gain an action point to close out the game if they committed really hard to hypothermia, or if, let's say for instance, Blizzard. But I ended up winning the game with payload, which is really good. And then after that, I played 2 5s in a row, won both games, mostly due to maximum velocity and Pulse Wave Harpoon in some combination. If you're able to hit those very early, it's very hard for them to deal with you. My heuristic is always, if you find Combustible Courier before your Pounder's gone, then you can win the matchup, because buffing this with Gauntlet up to 8 pretty much means that if I has to block with the entire hand or 3 cards plus Flamescale Furnace, or else you just get, a 2 for 7. Or on the Pounder turn, it's a 2 for 11. It's just too easy to win the matchup if you find it. I found it in both games, so pretty hardcore part of the matchup. So ended up 5-1 going into top 8. And guess who we get paired against round 1? What are you gonna do? Same thing as before. The first game, I actually lost at 23. No, they almost at 23 life. To be fair, they did use Tome, so maybe we technically got them down to 19. The second game was a little bit closer. I think they ended at 13 or 14, but still felt exactly the same. Just lost too many D-reacts to CNC, pummel, got disrupted too hard, too many go tall attacks, too many go wide attacks now, ironically in Oldhim. Didn't find the items fast enough. D-reacts got clumped, so I wasn't able to effectively be preventing damage, especially from dominate effects throughout the course of the game. Lost both games actually to dominated Red Glacial. So that was the run. So what do we learn? What I've learned is that this Sideboard package is no longer good into Guardian. It's no longer enough because the deck is too aggressive. And if they're relying on any combination of CNC plus pummel, then these are a liability. Because these basically say like gain 4 life against Guardian, gain 8 life against Guardian with 2 cards. So essentially is turn 2 cards into 4 life against Guardian. Right, the idea is that you're just going to play these in all of their tall attacks. Ideally, you'd want to save it for dominate effects so you can preserve life total. The idea is that some of their dominate effects are kind of like below rate, but the evasive damage is what makes them good. Now, to be fair, like Glacial is like kind of nuts because it's like, honestly, for a blue, it's not even below rate. Like Red Glacial is slightly above rate, and so you would think it would be 9, but it's actually 10 with evasive damage. So it's actually like kind of insane. But the idea is that you would use it for things like that, preserve your life total, trade off with their dominate effect with your arsenal blocking potential. The problem is that these are a liability, and if you don't cash them in immediately, then they're just there to get hit by CNC. And you do have Crown to save one of them, but even if they hit one, you just lose too much in the exchange, right? Because you take, let's say, like 4 damage to pummel, but then you lose 4 here. So you're down like what would potentially be 8 value in the matchup, and you're just not going to win at that point. That's too hard. So here's what I plan on doing going into the next week. I do need to preface this. Oh, this is not how you search your own deck. I do need to preface this that if you are expecting Dory, you should leave this as is, and you should just hope that you are on the 40% side of the matchup, right? Or sorry, 43% or 45, depending, whatever. There's a lot going on. You just have to hope that you are on this end of the matchup. That's it. Just cutting stuff here against Dory, is this going to cause problems for you? The main reason why I'm saying this is because my solution to the matchup is to actually cut all of these 0-cost D-reacts. The reason why is because while these do clean block Whale, having them in Arsenal is just a really big hindrance against any Arsenal disruption. Well, I mean, I really just mean CNC. And instead, what I would propose is running 3 red Sigils of Solace and 3 red Reinforce Lines. The reason why is because these are cards in Arsenal that don't get punished by CNC Pummel. That's mainly the reason why. There's actually no issue with running the D-Reacts into more proactive Guardians. Of course, you do have an issue where you're taking more damage than you did previously, and you may still just lose games based off of that fact. But having the cards in Arsenal isn't a problem. The problem is just the existence of CNC Pummel. This means that if they draw it, you just lose your sideboard card immediately, as well as the damage exchange. Whereas if you obviously have Reinforce the Line in your Arsenal, then you can actually also play around CNC, right? CNC Pummel. And same goes for Sigil. If they CNC Pummel you and you have Sigil in Arsenal, you can play it in response. You can actually make them overcommit, lose a Pummel, which may, on a different turn, be more impactful. And then you also get rid of 1 CNC. Because you only have to deal with 2 CNCs that are a problem for your unmovables at this point, because you have crowns. So you can crown the first CNC, and then you only have to deal with 2 more. And if you prioritize these as Arsenal targets, then you can block 6 on their CNC. If they pummel it, then you have a counterplay for it. You come out just fine in the exchange compared to what you would be if you had a D-React in there, any of the 0 cost ones. So this is how my Guardian sideboard would change. I honestly may even cut 1 Reinforcer line for 1 more Plasma Purifier. That way you're able to push over Rampart a little bit more, and more importantly, you're able to find them faster in the matchup, because the matchup is over pretty quickly now. Sometimes I make it the second cycle, but I'm not even surprised when Guardian kills me first cycle, just with how aggressive they are. But this is like a change I would make if I was teching now for Guardian. But as you can tell, this sideboard plan does not work well with Dorinthia. And the main reason why that may be relevant is, let me go find it really quick. All right, so this is why. LSS or anyone from there, if you're watching for some reason, please change the way you do these graphs. The pie charts are borderline unreadable. Using all of these assortments of colors and then not even specifying next to the pie chart slices what heroes are there pretty much makes it near impossible, especially on the dark backdrop as well. Certain shades just are almost impossible to distinguish or translate to the characters. Anyways, but that's a very minute thing. But anyway, Dory's back, which is actually very interesting. So Dorinthia had as many wins as Dash week 1. It actually had more wins than Briar, which is pretty interesting actually. I mean, Dorinthia could be in a good spot with a good pilot, especially into a meta that has Dromai and Fi and Briar. I don't know too much about the Ice Lantern matchup. I assume Olim's kind of difficult, but if they're on a more proactive style, you may have ways of dealing with them. I really don't know too much about the deck, but all I'll say is that it seems from the data that Dorinthia is actually around and just as relevant as Dash week 1. So this sideboard guide does a lot worse than a Dorinthia. Losing all of your 0 cost D-Reacts to be able to play from Arsenal or in response to a buff effect after blocking from hand are really big. So if you think there's Dorinthia, you should just go back to the original sideboard plan and just pray for the best that you're on that 40% end of the matchup when you play Oldhim. Or if you are expecting a lot of Oldhim and not expecting a lot of Dorinthia, or expecting Oldhim and Bravo some combination, I think that this ultimately is going to do better. Also lets you have really good plays into Oldhim where you can block 9 and then play Sigil, and you're up 3 value in the matchup. And this is really good early game, because the issue is that early game you have a lot of turns where you just don't even have a play. Sometimes you'll just keep a blue just to load items for some later point in the future and just pass, because you can't boost obviously, and you can't do much with a 1 card hand. Sometimes you can keep a 0 cost that does something. You can keep 0 to 60, but it's kind of useless. But being able to block 9, not take any damage to play Sigil and draw up your next hand is really good. Buys you some life to be able to keep cards for the late game, which is currently the issue, is that even if you make it to the late game and you set up the items, you're just kind of dead. You have to block with too many cards. You can't even get your engine going. But yeah, so that was my ProQuest run. Those were my small thoughts about the meta and any changes I would make to the deck. Let me know how your ProQuest season's going. Thank you for watching.